Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling a topic that you specifically requested, virtual reality. You've sent us some really interesting excerpts from the Wikipedia article on VR.
Oh, that's a great one.
It is.
So much to unpack there.
Exactly. And that's why we're here, to go beyond the surface and uncover those golden nuggets of knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
From its origins to its potential impact on our world, it's going to be quite a ride. Now,
I think what's so fascinating about this topic is that while VR might seem like this super cutting-edge thing, the core ideas have been around for a lot longer than you might think.
Oh, I totally agree. So maybe a good place to start is with the basics. Like, what exactly is VR, and how is it different from augmented reality, or AR?
Right, yeah, good point. It's easy to get those mixed up.
Yeah.
So VR creates a simulated experience, immersing you in a completely different world, using technology like 3D displays in those headsets and tracking your movements. While AR, on the other hand, overlays digital elements onto your real world. Think Pokemon Go or those apps that let you see how furniture would look in your living room.
Oh, yeah. Those are cool.
That's all part of a spectrum, really.
Oh.
It's called the reality-virtuality continuum.
Ooh, a continuum. Now, that's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm picturing a sliding scale between the real and the virtual. Are there other areas where that continuum applies?
Oh, definitely, but maybe.
Okay, we'll save that thought for later.
Yeah, we can come back to that.
But for now, let's step back in time. When did this whole VR thing get started?
Well, you might be surprised to hear that even Renaissance artists were playing with perspective in their paintings to create illusions of depth.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
A very early form of VR, if you think about it.
I guess you could say that, yeah.
And then in the 19th century, you had the stereoscope, which used two images to create a 3D effect. But for a more concrete example of something closer to what we recognize as VR.
Something with a headset, maybe.
Exactly. We have to jump to the 1950s with Morton Heilig's Sensorama.
Ah, the Sensorama. Wasn't that the one that engaged multiple senses?
Exactly. Sight, sound, even smell.
Yeah.
It was this incredible mechanical device, and the goal was to give the viewer, as Heilig himself put it, a complete sensation of reality.
Wow, that's pretty ambitious for the 1950s, especially before computers were even a thing.
I know, right? Talk about ahead of its time.
Okay, so from there, we move on to the Sword of Damocles in 1968, which is widely considered the first head-mounted display.
Yeah, but maybe calling it head-mounted is a bit generous, honestly.
Okay.
This thing was so heavy, it had to be suspended from the ceiling.
Oh, wow. Talk about a neck workout.
And another important distinction is actually closer to AR than VR. It used something called optical pass-through, which basically meant it overlaid graphics onto the real world.
Oh, okay. So kind of like a precursor to today's AR glasses. That helps clear up the VR versus AR thing for me.
Glad to hear it.
So it seems like after these early pioneers, VR started finding its niche in specific fields.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What was happening in the 70s and 80s.
So during that time, VR really found a home in industries like aviation, military training, and even automotive design. One interesting example is David M., an artist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He was creating navigable virtual worlds as far back as the late 70s. And then you had things like the Aspen Movie Map in 1978, one of the first virtual tours ever.
Oh, wow. So you could virtually explore Aspen, Colorado back in the 70s.
Exactly. Pretty cool, huh?
That's amazing. But I'm guessing things really started to heat up in the late 80s with Jaron Lanier.
Oh, absolutely.
And the term virtual reality as we know it today.
Yep. Lanier and his company, VPL Research, they developed some really groundbreaking devices like the Data Glove, which let you interact with virtual objects, and the iPhone, an early head-mounted display. And you know what's interesting? They also licensed their tech to Mattel, which led to the creation of the Power Glove.
Oh, yeah, the Power Glove. I remember that thing. It was a bit clunky, but man, so cool.
Maybe a bit before its time, actually. The tech just wasn't quite there yet. But it was definitely an early attempt to bring VR to a wider audience. Then in the 90s, we got a wave of consumer headsets like Sega VR and Nintendo's Virtual Boy. And we also saw the rise of virtuality arcade systems, which were like super high-tech for their time, but man, were they expensive.
I bet. How much were they?
Some cost as much as $73,000.
Wow. It's incredible how much more accessible VR has become since then. That is a huge price difference.
I know, right?
So while consumer VR was kind of finding its footing, what was happening on the research side of things?
Well, one big development was the KVE.
The KV.
Yes, it stands for Cave Automatic Virtual Environment.
Oh, okay.
It emerged in the 90s. Basically, imagine a room where the walls are projection screens. creating a fully immersive virtual environment.
Oh, I get it. So you're surrounded by the virtual world.
Exactly. It was a major step forward for shared interactive VR experiences.
I can see how that would be perfect for research and development. You could have a team of people working together in a virtual space.
Exactly.
So we've got consumer headsets, we've got immersive rooms. What else was happening in the 90s?
Well, this might surprise you, but this is where we can trace the origins of Second Life.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Philip Rosedale, who created Second Life, he actually started out focusing on developing VR hardware, but he eventually pivoted to creating that virtual world platform.
Huh. That's fascinating how these seemingly unrelated projects can converge and evolve over time.
Totally.
So after all this innovation in the 90s, did things kind of slow down in the 2000s?
You could say that. The 2000s were kind of a quiet period for VR. Not much public interest or investment. It was just kind of simmering in the background, you know?
Okay, so like a lull before the storm.
Exactly.
And that storm arrived with Palmer Luckey and the Oculus Rift, right?
Yeah, you got it. In 2010, Lucky's prototype for the Oculus Rift really reignited the excitement around VR.
Yeah, I remember that. What made his prototype so special?
Well, what he did was use software to overcome those lens distortion issues that plagued earlier headsets. It meant a wider field of view, a much more immersive experience, a real game changer.
It sounds like Lucky's innovation really kicked off a new era for VR. What happened next?
It was like everyone jumped in all of a sudden. Major tech companies like HTC, Sony, and Valve all released their own high-quality headsets.
You're talking about the Vive, PlayStation VR, and the Index, right?
You got it. It was like a VR renaissance.
So we're seeing this resurgence of high-quality VR, but were there any other big technological leaps during this time?
Yeah, actually. One of the most important developments was the emergence of standalone headsets, like the Oculus Quest.
Oh, right. The ones that don't need to be tethered to a PC.
Exactly. And what makes these so cool is that they use inside-out tracking.
Okay, inside-out tracking. You're going to have to explain that one.
Sure. So before this, headsets relied on external sensors or base stations placed around the room to track your movements.
Oh, I see.
But inside-out tracking uses cameras and sensors built into the headset itself to do the same thing.
Oh, that's so much more convenient.
Right, no more external equipment.
Yeah.
That made VR much more portable, much more accessible.
Okay, so standalone headsets were a big step towards making VR more mainstream. So where do we go from here? What's the next big thing for VR?
The one really exciting trend is this focus on mixed reality. Headsets like the MetaQuest Pro and Apple Vision Pro are blurring the lines between the virtual and real worlds even more.
Oh, yeah. The ones that can overlay digital content onto your real world.
Exactly. Plus, they can track your hand movements so you can interact more naturally. It's a really exciting time to be following this technology.
Definitely. It sounds like we're on the verge of some really transformative experiences. Okay, so we've talked about the evolution of VR, where it's headed. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's break down the technology that makes all this possible. Let's talk hardware.
All right, let's do it. So the heart of any VR system is the headset, right?
Makes sense.
And the most important components are the displays, typically OLED or LCD screens. They create those 3D images.
Right.
Then you've got the audio system for immersive sound, of course, and the positional tracking systems that monitor your every move.
And then you've got the motion controllers, the things that let you interact with the virtual environment, right?
Yeah, exactly. They've gotten so much more sophisticated, allowing for really nuanced and natural interactions. And for an even more realistic experience, there are haptic feedback devices. Think gloves or suits that provide tactile sensations.
Whoa, hold on. So you can actually feel what you're touching in the virtual world.
That's the idea. You can feel textures, resistance, all sorts of things. It adds a whole other layer of immersion.
Wow, that's taking things to a whole new level. Are there any other hardware components that add to that feeling of being present in the virtual world?
Oh, definitely. For people who want to walk or run in virtual reality without actually, bumping into their real-world furniture, there's something called omnidirectional treadmills.
Okay, I've heard of those, but I don't really get how they work.
They're pretty clever. Basically, they let you walk in place, and the treadmill translates those movements into virtual steps.
Wow, that's pretty ingenious.
Right. And all of this wouldn't be possible without the advancements we've seen in smartphone technology.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, smartphones paved the way for affordable, high-resolution displays, powerful processors, miniaturized sensors, all essential for modern VR headsets.
It's amazing how seemingly unrelated technologies can converge to drive innovation, isn't it?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the hardware, right?
No.
Software plays a crucial role in creating those immersive virtual worlds, too.
Okay, so let's talk about the software side of things.
Sure. So first, we've got standards like VRML and X3D. They're basically languages for developing and distributing virtual worlds. Then there's WebVR, which enables VR experiences right within your web browser. And then, maybe most importantly, there are game engines like Unity and Unreal Engine. Those are the tools that developers use to build those incredibly detailed and interactive virtual environments that we see today.
So the hardware captures our movements, the software creates these amazing virtual worlds, but what about making those experiences feel real, like you're really there?
That's where things get really interesting. To create that sense of presence in virtual reality, it takes a delicate balance of several factors. Things like display resolution, image latency, refresh rate, and field of view.
Okay, let's break those down. What about display resolution? How does that affect things?
Well, display resolution is all about how many pixels are packed into those screens. The higher the resolution, the sharper and more detailed the images are.
Right.
And that's crucial for making things feel real.
So you want the virtual world to look as crisp and clear as possible.
Exactly. And we measure this using a concept called MAR, or minimal angle of resolution. It basically means the smallest detail your eye can see.
So the goal is to have VR displays match or even exceed what our eyes can see in the real world.
You got it.
Okay, I'm with you so far. What about image latency and refresh rate? What are those and why are they important?
Good questions. So image latency is the delay between your movement and when you see that movement reflected in the display.
Oh, okay. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, and if the latency is too high, it can create a really jarring experience. It can lead to motion sickness because your brain is getting conflicting signals.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
Ideally, we want the latency to be as low as possible, less than 20 milliseconds, to make the experience really seamless.
Okay, so low latency is good, and what about refresh rate?
Refresh rate is how many times per second the image on the display is updated. So a higher refresh rate means smoother motion and less of that screen door effect where you can see the individual pixels.
Ah, okay. I've noticed that on some lower quality displays.
Yeah, and low latency, a high refresh rate is really important for minimizing motion sickness and maximizing that sense of immersion.
Okay, so high resolution, low latency, high refresh rate. Those are all key for creating a truly convincing VR experience. What about field of view? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, so field of view, or FOV, refers to how much of the world you can see at any given moment. Our natural vision has a really wide field of view, almost 180 degrees horizontally.
Right.
But current VR headsets are limited, usually around 100 to 110 degrees.
So your peripheral vision is cut off.
Yeah, exactly. It can make the experience feel less immersive, sometimes even a bit claustrophobic.
I can see how that would be a problem. Are there ways to improve that?
Oh, absolutely. Developers are constantly working on increasing the FOV while keeping the resolution and refresh rates high.
Okay, so it's a balancing act.
It is. But I'm confident we'll see some big advancements in FOV technology in the coming years.
That's good to hear. So we've covered how VR is created, but now I'm really curious to explore how it's being used beyond entertainment.
Oh yeah, me too.
You talked about medicine, education, and business earlier. Can you tell us more about those applications?
Definitely. VR is no longer just about gaming. It's becoming this really powerful tool in a whole range of fields. Actually, some of the most exciting stuff is happening outside of entertainment.
I'm really eager to dive into those applications. It sounds like VR is going to have a huge impact on how we learn, work, and heal.
It really is. And what's fascinating is that these applications often use the same principles of immersion and interactivity that make VR so compelling for entertainment.
It's like taking the best parts of gaming and using them for serious purposes.
Exactly. But we'll have to save those examples for part 2.
Oh, man. I guess that means we're out of time for this part.
Yeah, we'll delve into those exciting applications next time.
Welcome back. Last time, we took a trip through the evolution of virtual reality, from its surprising beginnings to the rise of those amazing headsets and the potential of mixed reality.
Yeah, VR has come a long way.
It really has. But now I'm ready to explore those impactful applications you mentioned.
Oh yeah, there are some really cool ones.
Where do you want to start?
Well, how about medicine? VR is revolutionizing surgical training.
Oh, yeah, you shared an article about that.
Yeah.
It's amazing how surgeons can practice procedures in a safe environment without any risk to real patients.
Right, it's like they can hone their skills and build their confidence.
I was particularly fascinated by the idea of virtual reality exposure therapy.
VRE.
Yes. Can you explain how that works and what it can treat?
Definitely. So VRE uses VR's ability to create these really realistic environments to help people confront their fears, like
Yeah.
in a controlled way.
Well, that makes sense.
For example, imagine someone with a fear of heights.
Okay.
They could gradually be exposed to virtual scenarios involving heights, all within the safe space of a therapist's office.
I see. So it's like a step-by-step process.
Exactly. The therapist can adjust the intensity of the experience and help the patient learn coping mechanisms.
It's incredible how technology can be used for such targeted therapy.
It really is. And it's proving effective for a wide range of anxiety disorders.
Like PTSD or social phobias.
Exactly. Those are just a couple of examples.
Are there any other medical applications we should know about?
Oh, definitely. VR is also being used in rehabilitation.
Really?
Yeah. It can help people regain motor skills after a stroke or an injury, for example.
How does that work?
Well, VR can create these engaging exercises that challenge patients to use their affected limbs in a virtual environment.
It's like tricking the brain into healing.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It promotes what's called neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself and form new connections.
So VR can actually speed up the recovery process.
It can, yeah. And you know what's really remarkable?
What's that?
VR is even showing promise in treating phantom limb pain.
Oh, wow. I've heard about that, but I never understood how VR could help with pain.
It's pretty cool, actually. It allows patients to visualize and even interact with a virtual representation of their missing limb.
I see.
And this can help retrain the brain
Yep.
and reduce the sensation of pain.
It's amazing how VR can target not just physical conditions, but those that involve the brain, too.
It's a powerful tool for sure.
So VR is making a real difference in medicine. But what about the business world? How is VR changing the way we work?
Well, for one thing, VR is being used to create more engaging virtual meetings.
I can see how that would be useful, especially with so many people working remotely these days.
Right. Instead of just staring at tiny faces on a screen, you can actually feel like you're in the same room with your colleagues.
Yeah, that would definitely make remote work feel more connected.
And VR is transforming training and development in a lot of industries.
Oh, so.
Well, companies can create immersive simulations of real-world work environments.
So employees can practice complex procedures or learn new skills in a safe environment.
Exactly. It's much safer and often more cost-effective than traditional training methods.
It's like bringing the training to the employee instead of the other way around.
Exactly. And it can be especially useful for jobs that require quick thinking and adaptability because employees can experience a range of scenarios and practice their responses.
So VR is making the workplace safer, more efficient, and more engaging.
It has the potential to, yeah.
Now, let's talk about education. You mentioned that VR could revolutionize learning.
Oh, absolutely.
But how?
Imagine a classroom where students can step back in time and witness historical events firsthand.
Okay, that would be pretty cool.
Or they could travel to distant planets and explore the cosmos. VR can make learning so much more immersive and engaging.
It's a far cry from textbooks and lectures, that's for sure. Are there any real-world examples of VR being used in classrooms today?
Oh, yeah, there are tons. For example, anatomy students can use VR to virtually dissect a human body.
Well, hold on. You mean without actually cutting anything open?
Exactly. They can explore the body's systems and structures in a way that's just not possible with traditional models.
I bet that's way more engaging than staring at a diagram in a book.
It is. And history students can take virtual field trips to ancient civilizations.
Like walk around the Colosseum or something.
Exactly. They can even interact with virtual characters from the past.
And science students can conduct experiments in virtual labs.
Exactly. They can manipulate objects and observe the results without any risk of real-world hazards.
It sounds like VR can really help students who might struggle to connect with traditional teaching methods.
It can, yeah. It taps into that natural desire to learn through exploration and discovery.
And beyond engaging students, VR can also make learning more accessible, right?
Definitely. For students with physical disabilities, VR can open up a whole world of experiences that might be physically challenging in real life.
That's a really important point.
And for students in remote or underserved communities, VR can provide access to educational resources that they might not otherwise have.
So VR can help level the playing field and make education more equitable.
I believe so, yeah. It's about giving everyone the opportunity to learn and explore in a way that's engaging and meaningful.
I'm really excited about the future of education with VR. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible.
Oh, definitely. It's a rapidly evolving field, for sure.
Okay, speaking of immersive experiences, I'd love to hear more about VR's impact on art and museums.
Oh, that's a fascinating area. Artists are using VR to create completely new forms of expression.
Oh, really? Like what?
Imagine sculpting in 3 dimensions, painting with light and sound, creating interactive installations that respond to your movements and emotions.
Wow. It's like stepping inside a work of art.
Exactly. And museums are using VR to make their collections accessible to a global audience.
So you could virtually tour the Louvre or the British Museum from your living room.
Exactly. It's a game changer for people who can't travel or have mobility limitations.
It's a way to democratize access to art and culture.
It is. And it's not just about viewing existing art. VR is creating opportunities for new forms of artistic collaboration.
How so?
Well, artists from all over the world can come together in virtual spaces to create and exhibit their work.
That's breaking down geographical barriers and fostering a global artistic community.
You got it. It's a really exciting time for art in the VR space.
I agree. It's amazing how technology can expand our creative horizons and make art more accessible for everyone.
It really is inspiring.
So before we wrap up this part, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the future of VR.
The future of VR.
Where do you see this technology going in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. I think we'll see headsets become even more lightweight, comfortable, and affordable. The lines between the real and virtual worlds will blur even further. We'll also see advancements in haptic technology for even more realistic tactile experiences. But maybe most importantly, we'll see VR become more integrated into our daily lives, not just for entertainment, but for everything: work, education, healthcare, even social interaction.
So you envision a future where VR is just a natural extension of our reality.
I do, yeah. It's exciting, but it also raises some important questions about the impact of VR on society and on ourselves.
That's a good point. It sounds like we have a lot more to discuss.
We do. We'll dive into those questions and wrap up our VR exploration in part 3.
Welcome back to the final part of our virtual reality deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We really have, from the history of VR and the technology behind it to those incredible applications in medicine, education, and art.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see how VR is evolving and its potential to impact so many aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. But as with any powerful tool, there are some important considerations and potential downsides we need to address.
You're right, we can't ignore those.
You know, last time we touched on some of the ethical dilemmas surrounding data privacy and the potential for VR to be misused.
And I think those concerns become even more critical as we move toward a future where VR is more and more integrated into our everyday lives.
It's a little unsettling to think about, to be honest.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where everything we do in VR is tracked, analyzed, potentially even manipulated.
It's a valid concern.
So what can we do to make sure VR is developed and used responsibly?
Well, I think transparency is key.
Okay, how so?
We need the companies developing these systems to be upfront about what data they're collecting, how they're using it, and what safeguards are in place to protect our privacy.
I agree. We need to know what's happening with our information.
Absolutely. And it's not just about data privacy either.
What else should we be thinking about?
The potential psychological and social impact of VR.
Okay, can you elaborate on that?
Sure. As VR experiences become more and more realistic and immersive, we have to consider how they might affect our perception of reality, our relationships with others, and even our own sense of self.
Yeah, those are some big questions.
They are. I mean, could spending excessive time in virtual worlds lead to social isolation?
It's possible.
Or make it harder to distinguish between virtual and real experiences? Those are things we need to be mindful of.
Definitely. It sounds like it all comes down to balance and being aware of the potential risks as well as the benefits.
I think that's a great way to put it.
So for someone who's just starting to explore VR, what advice would you give them?
I'd say approach it with curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Okay, I like that.
Be open to the incredible possibilities, but also be aware of the potential downsides. Stay informed about how the technology is being used, engage in discussions, and advocate for responsible development.
I think that's excellent advice. It reminds me of that saying, with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. And that applies to all of us, developers, users, policymakers, everyone. We all have a role to play in shaping the future of VR.
Well said. It's been an incredible journey exploring this topic with you. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
So to wrap things up, what is the one key takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
Well, I hope they've gained a deeper understanding of what VR is, what it can do, and the complexity surrounding it. And I also hope they feel empowered to participate in the ongoing conversation about how we shape this technology so that it benefits humanity.
Well said. It's been a fascinating deep dive into virtual reality.
Yeah, it has.
Now that you've delved into the world of VR with us, what application excites you the most and what concerns you the most? How do you think this technology will shape our future?
Hmm. That's a great question to consider. And on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of virtual reality. We've given you a lot to think about, and we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity to explore further.
Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.